It is exactly 9 a.m. Universal Time, so we will start. Good morning, good afternoon, bonjour, bon après-midi, sabal khair to all of you joining us today from across Africa and around the world. Before we get started, I just want to give you a few quick housekeeping notes. Please, throughout this webinar, keep your microphone muted. And most importantly, if you want to listen in English or French, you can select your preferred language using the interpretation feature that you will see at the bottom of your screen. So interpretation is available in English and French. Should you have any questions during this webinar, please post them in the chat. We will compile them and address these questions during the Q&A session at the end, of course, time permitting. Thank you for your cooperation, and we hope that you will enjoy this webinar. On behalf of ACI Africa, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on airport resilience and crisis management, lessons from global disruptions. This webinar is conducted in collaboration with one of our privileged partners, Munich Airport International. As you know, the aviation industry continues to operate in an increasingly complex and unpredictable environment. From pandemics and cyber incidents to extreme weather events, operational disruptions, and geopolitical challenges, as we've seen recently. Airports are constantly required to adapt and respond to events that can significantly impact their operations. This webinar is therefore both timely and highly relevant. Resilience is no longer simply about managing crises, but when they occur, but it's also about building the capability to anticipate disruptions, maintain critical operations, recover effectively, and emerge stronger from adverse events. During today's session, we will explore the concept of airport operational resilience and its relationship with crisis management and business continuity. We will review lessons learned from major global disruptions, examine the key factors that influence resilience at airports, and discuss practical measures that airports can adopt to strengthen preparedness, continuity, response, and recovery. Our objective is to provide participants with practical insights and proven approaches that can help airports enhance their resilience and better prepare for the challenges of an increasingly uncertain operating environment. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, allow me to briefly introduce myself. My name is Romesh Boyrou, Director Strategy and Business Development at ACI Africa, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion. Joining us today is Mr. Seraphim Chakalosh, Senior Consultant at Munich Airport International, who brings extensive international experience in airport operations, resilience, and crisis management. Seraphim, thank you for being with us today. And without any further ado, let me start by asking Seraphim, can you tell us why is airport resilience more important today than ever before?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Romesh. Thanks for the intro. So, as you mentioned, airports operate in a complex and volatile environment. We have disruptions that they are no longer an exception, but it tends to be the norm. So we have from extreme weather events, infrastructure failures, cyber incidents, security threats, global health crisis. We've seen a lot, and airports must continuously adapt to unexpected changes that can impact our operations, can impact passenger experience, and of course, safety. So therefore, resilience should be embedded. And while we will discuss about it more, I want to start by grounding this in our own context here, in today's context, and explain a little bit why this is interesting topic and important for African airports. African airports operate across an enormous range. So we are talking from major international hubs to smaller regional airports, working with limited redundancy and tighter budgets. So there is no single resilience template that fits everyone here. What is common, though, is that the resilience challenges in the region are very often shaped by infrastructure and utility dependencies, whether we are talking about power, fuel, water, telecoms, drainage, landside access. And these are daily operational realities for many airports, not abstract risks. And layer on top of that, we have the climate exposure, public health events, security threats, workforce constraints, and geopolitical disruption. And as you can all see, we have a complex picture. So the global lessons I will share today are genuinely useful, but they need to be interpreted through your own operating reality. So the goal is not to copy, for example, Heathrow or Changi or any other successful airport, but it is to build a practical, scalable resilience that fits your own airport, your resources, and your environment. So that's why I think resilience matters, and it's important for African airports as well. And I think that that sets the scene, Romas.
Thank you, Seraphim, for setting the tone of this webinar. Uh, so before we look at specific disruptions, let's start with the fundamentals. So, Seraphim, can you tell us how does airport resilience differ from traditional airport crisis management and business continuity planning that all our airports, we have as mandate? And why is this distinction important for our airport leaders?
Yeah, thanks, Romas. That's a very, very important question. So let me define it clearly. Airport operational resilience is the ability of an airport system to predict, to absorb, to react to, and to recover from disruption with maintaining its core functions. So the first thing to understand is that it combines business continuity and crisis management into one integrated system. It is broader than either on its own, and it covers all this wider area. So the second and most important point, resilience is a capability, it's not a plan. So a document on itself does not perform under pressure. What performs is a long-term tested, practiced capability that it's built into how the whole organization works. It is shaped by operational choices, by strategic leadership decisions, and the objective is not to avoid all disruption. This we know it's impossible, but the objective is to minimize impact, protect our passengers, keep our essential operations running, and recover faster than you otherwise would. So just to clarify, we have four main key terms when we are talking about resilience. We have the crisis response, we have crisis management, we have business continuity, and we have operational resilience. And these four terms get used interchangeable all the time, and that conflation causes real planning gaps and misallocated investment. So it's worth being precise. It's worth make clear what are the distinction between these four terms. First of all, crisis response is the immediate time-critical layer. We're talking about life safety, we're talking about evacuations, stabilization, which is governed by the airport emergency plan. So crisis management sits above it. The strategic oversight, unified command escalation decisions, and stakeholder coordination that direct the response. Then business continuity is different again, as it is the sustained capacity to keep critical functions running during and after disruption, defined by recovery time objectives and governed by a separate business continuity plan, not our airport emergency plan. And finally, operational resilience is the broadest of the four and is the long-term organization-wide capability that encompasses all three, all the previous terms, and includes the strategic decisions made before an event occurs. So the practical takeaway, most airports invest heavily in crisis response and far less in business continuity and resilience. And that imbalance is one of the most consistent findings in post-event reviews. So if we use this as a framework, if we use resilience in a framework, this is the framework that holds it all together. We have four phases: the anticipation, absorb, respond, and recover. So first of all, to anticipate. What does to anticipate? To anticipate means it's the preventive risk detection. It includes scenario planning, horizon scanning, seeing the threat before it arrives. Then the next phase is the absorb. So continued functioning under stress through redundancy, excess capacity, we need trained staff, and the buffer that keeps you operating. This is the absorb phase. Then in the respond, we have the phase that we are activating our plans, we are coordinating with our stakeholders, we are caring for our passengers, communicating during the event, and the last phase is the recovery. During the recovery, we are talking about restoring our operations, capturing lessons, rebuilding the confidence, and investing in improvements. The key insight is that most airports concentrate their investment in the respond phase. It is necessary, of course, but unfortunately, it is not sufficient. The airports that handle disruption best are the ones that invest across all four phases, particularly anticipate and recover, which are, I think, are the most neglected. So this is how to move on this.
Thank you, Seraphim. Thank you very much, and thank you for clearly articulating that resilience framework. You would agree that one of the points, which I particularly find interesting, is that the severity of disruption, and this is often determined long before the event itself occurs. So, can you elaborate on how governance arrangement, infrastructure design, staffing models, and technology decisions influence an airport's ability to withstand and recover from disruption?
Yeah, Romas, what you mentioned is very, very right. So this is one of the most important ideas, and it's going to be throughout the whole session. So let's us be direct about it. The severity of a disruption is not determined by how well we respond on the day. It is predetermined by the strategic and structural decisions made long before the disruption begins. To use an example, we have a clear example. It's Atlanta Airport, December 2017. They had an 11-hour shutdown. We had over 1,200 flights canceled. Now, what happened? Backup power existed. It was a power failure. Backup power existed, but it had never been tested under load. So the decision not to test it, made long before then December, was the real cause of the shutdown, not the power cut itself. So as we go through the cases, I want you to hold this lens. The question is never just what went wrong on the day. It is what decision made months or years earlier about governance, about infrastructure, about staffing, about technology, about coordination or financial reserves, and created the vulnerability in the first place. So the damage is often decided long before the event. So, Romas, shall we move on?
Yeah, thank you for highlighting this proactive approach required. Yes, so as we move into the different disruption scenarios, what, according to you, should airport leaders be looking for when assessing how vulnerable their operations may be to disruption?
Well, we have many different. One of the talents is that we have in our landscape we have a lot of different categories that we need to focus in and we need to be prepared for. So let's discuss what are these categories. First of all, extreme weather conditions and climate events: storms, flooding, heat, ice, fog, depending on the climate that every airport lies. Then we have infrastructure and utility failures. You might be talking about power, fuel, drainage, baggages, airfield lighting. We have many different categories. Then we have technology and cyber outages, system failures, software updates, cyber attacks. We've seen all this. Then we have security incidents and terrorism. We have threats, we have suspicious items, we have landside and airside attacks. Again, a lot of different categories. Then we have public health crisis. We've seen quite recently pandemics, disease outbreaks, mass passenger illness. Also, we have workforce and labor shortages that we also seen recently. We have strikes, we have mass absence, we have skills loss, and finally, which is also quite recent, we have geopolitical disruption, we have wars, we have sanctions, we have airspace closures. So all seven are live threats for all airports and also for African airports. And these threats are not hypotheticals. And here is a question that I would like to put to everyone here. How many of these have you exercised? I'm sure that you have seen throughout your careers many of these scenarios, and you have to deal with many of these scenarios. But let's see some specific examples and how they were handled, and what is the lesson we can get out of these examples. Starting with the climate and the extreme weather events. Extreme weather is now a leading cause of airport disruption globally. We had, for example, Winter Storm Elliott, and it was an infrastructure issue because the weather, the infrastructure triggered from weather, and it was not only there; it scaled and it also caused troubles with IT, with crew management failures. That all this issue exposed. The lesson from that is that extreme events reveal pre-existing weaknesses. So stress testing our own operations before the storm is a priority. Similarly, not long ago, Dubai, a couple of years ago in 2024, and Dubai is the third busiest international airport in the world, sat down by record rainfall. So the assumption that your location protects you is no longer safe. With the climate change, this is not a safe option anymore. The real message is the shifting baseline. Events once considered exceptional now are becoming normal. So for African airports, for example, that means flooding at coastal sites and heat stress on airfield surfaces need forward-looking planning, not reliance on past data, but try to foresee the future. Then we have seen infrastructure and utility failures. Infrastructure failures are consistent, they are costly, and often avoidable. We referred previously to Atlanta. I gave you this example, the 11 hours shutdown and the 1,200 flights that they had to cancel, backup systems that didn't come online as intended. So the common thread across these cases is that that disappropriate impact almost always traces back to a single point of failure. It might be power, it might be fuel, it might be water, it might be communication. But the hard rule here is that a backup system that it isn't regularly tested under realistic load cannot be treated as reliable. So for airports here, where grid instability is a daily reality, the business case is direct. Calculate what one major power failure costs you in cancelled flights, passenger welfare, and reputation. Then compare it to a proper backup and a quarterly load test. The numbers, you will see that the numbers make the argument themselves, and they will help you with the discussions with your management. Now, if we draw some knowledge from a local example within the region, um, so we have from 2013, we had this major fire at Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Nairobi, destroyed the arrivals area, suspended flights. And actually, this case showed how fast a single infrastructure failure cascades, hitting passengers processing, airline operations, communications, and continuity all at once. Recovery depended on improvised arrangements, and that's actually an interesting point for me because Nairobi Airport had to improvise in order to rapidly restore their capability or in operations, even in a minimum way. So the core lessons here is that resilience is not only about preventing failure; it's about maintaining essential operations when core infrastructure is suddenly lost. So the question here for everyone is, have you actually identified how critical parts of your operations, whether we're talking about arrivals, whether we're talking about baggage or passenger information or welfare, would be sustained if your terminal area became unavailable tomorrow? And while improvising works, we've seen it in Nairobi that they did a good job. Planning the contingency in advance is far cheaper and is far safer as an option. Then we have seen a lot of disruptions, a lot of problems from technology and cyber outages. And ICAO has named cyber threats as one of the fastest growing risks in aviation. But the most instructive recent case, it was not an attack. So you might remember it was July 2024, the CrowdStrike incident, which was a faulty software update and crashed around 8.5 million systems worldwide and disrupted roughly 46,000 flights in a day. And that's the key point. We have a routine update from a trusted vendor, which proves technology supply chain risks is as real as internal IT risk. And to draw from experience from another case, British Airways in 2017 and 2019 showed the other half. When digital systems dominate, manual fallbacks tend to quietly atrophy, and a fallback that's never practiced will not work when you need it. So testing those fallback is one of the lowest cost and highest return investments available. It only costs you staff time. There's no capital cost. Then we have cases related to security incidents and terrorism. So we can go back to the case in Brussels from March 2016. We had two coordinated bombings in the departure hall. We had 16 lives lost and 12-day closure, the longest in European aviation, following a terror attack. So the structural lesson here is that the hardest security challenge at any airport is the congested landside areas, check-in halls, drop-off zones, queues, places that concentrate people but can't be really secured by conventional screening. And ICAO's answer is security by design. So building security into the infrastructure from the planning stage rather than retrofitting after an incident. And inside the threat remains a persistent vulnerability needing targeted mitigation. So for African airports, security investment often concentrates at the checkpoint, and the landside perimeter and inside the threat deserve equal attention that I would suggest you pay attention. Then we have seen public health crisis. The recent one with COVID-19, um, we saw it cut global passenger numbers by more than 90% between March and June 2020. And it was undeniable the largest disruption in the history of civil aviation. And this disruption exposed weaknesses everywhere. So from workforce planning to technology readiness to capacity management. And we've seen that the revenue collapse was almost instant from retail to parking, aeronautical fees fell together, exposing the fragility, the financial fragility of the sector. The lasting lesson is that public health annexes in the emergency plan and financial stress testing against low traffic scenarios are now essential. We need to be prepared and we need to have them planned. And for Africa specifically, recovery was harder here with thinner financial buffers, with uneven state support, and slower rebuilding of workforce and connectivity. And I think that's an honest reality. It's that it's worth to mention. Now, another category we've seen is the labor and the workforce shortages. Post-pandemic, especially, the industry found it couldn't rebuild its workforce as fast as traffic recovered. And we've seen it even for airports, even for airlines, whether we're talking about ground staff, whether we're talking about flight staff, every different category. Schiphol, for example, had to cap passengers in summer 2022 because it couldn't staff operations. Then we have NUTS, the UK's provider of air traffic services in 2023. So the interdependency risk, an ATC computer failure affecting a handful of staff cascaded into 700 plus cancellations and 40,000 disrupted passengers. The underlying issue is that safety critical roles carry long training and certification lead times, that you can close a staffing gap quickly. And you know better than me, I'm sure, that in African airports, there was also a very specific dimension in this, because post-COVID, a lot of experienced staff migrated to recovering Gulf carriers, so the pipelines couldn't refill fast enough. So the mitigations are practical: cross-training, succession planning, and mutual aid agreements with your partners. And then we have seen lately a lot of different geopolitical conflicts. We've seen a few years back the Russia-Ukraine airspace closure of Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian airspace from February 2022. So it's over 5 years now. Demonstrated the disruption type that most risk registered had never modeled, because it was a sudden, politically driven, long duration closure of a major corridor. Cause of this, rerouted Europe-Asia services by hours and restructured airlines economics overnight. And it's been now over 5 years, and this proving that these aren't temporary events, they can even become permanent. And the vulnerability it exposed. Airports relying on that routing found their connectivity depending on conditions entirely outside of their control. So the lesson here is that put geopolitical airspace risk in your risk register and connectivity strategy. And for African airports, this wasn't distant. Ethiopian, Kenya Airways, and others were directly affected with real consequences for route economics. And the most recent example. I would say this is our most current case, started in February 2026, just a few months back. Regional military escalation in the Gulf airspace. The scale is striking. We had over 21,300 flights cancelled in the first week. We had two of the world's busiest hubs, Dubai and Doha, suspended operations, cascading delays across every region. We had even Kuwait International Airport sustained physical damage, raising a scenario few airports had ever modeled, like a direct targeting of airport infrastructure. For this room, the impact wasn't abstract. East and West African routes transiting Dubai and Doha were directly disrupted, and it's the clearest illustration we have of how a compound disruption behaves in real time. And several lessons here are directly actionable. First, have dependency amplifies impact. So when Dubai and Doha close together, the effect hits 4 continents at once. And if your route economics depend on Gulf connectivity, that belongs on your risk register. Second, transit passengers welfare. We had 8,000 passengers trapped in Doha with no local resources. So preposition welfare and dedicated transit protocols are essential. Third, communication quality diverts sharply. We had the example from Qatar Airways that they were issuing regular time-stamped updates, while others were inconsistent with their communication, and that drove crowding and distress. And that was a planning difference, not a resource difference. And finally, the targeting of physical infrastructure means airports everywhere should re-examine their protection and redundancy assumptions. So that's the sweep of disruptions and the lessons across them. Promise, over to you.
Thank you, Seraphim. And I think that the latest example is quite, speaks a lot. And some African countries, and especially island states like Seychelles and Mauritius, they've been heavily affected by that traffic disruption. I know for once that Seychelles had almost a 50% drop in traffic during the peak of that Gulf tension. So while we look across the different case studies that you've just discussed, so Seraphim, what separates airports that manage disruption effectively from those that really struggle?
That's a nice question. So, but before we move into this, before we talk about capabilities, I want to just ask the audience to reflect a little bit. So, which disruption type is the biggest resilience concern for your airport right now? Which critical dependency worries you most? It might be power, it might be fuel, or IT, or workforce, or partner coordination, or communication, or anything else. And this disruption type, when was the last time your backup system or your manual fallback was tested realistically? And what is the one resilience gap you would prioritize in the next 12 months? So reflect, hold your answers in your mind. I think that these answers are the most useful thing you can take from today, because you can turn them into your own action list after this session. And of course, you can even share them in the chat here so we can see what you think and what is the perspective from your own airports. So let's talk about capabilities and what makes the difference. First of all, situational awareness is a core resilience capability. And situational awareness is the foundation, I would say, of every other capability that we will discuss. You cannot respond to what you cannot see. So it is the capacity to identify, understand, and communicate the nature and scope of a disruption in real time. And that requires integrated monitoring, which means simultaneous access to flight data, queue management, security systems, weather feeds, and obviously stakeholder communication. And it requires information sharing protocols agreed in advance with all your stakeholders, including the airlines, your ground handlers, air traffic control, and the government agencies that they are involved in your operations. But here's the key point. The systems that produce data are only as valuable as the trained duty managers who can read the trends and escalate early. So, according to ICAO, early detection is one of the strongest determinants of response quality. We have, for example, the APOC model, the Airport Operations Center, which it could be the structural answer, bringing all partners around a shared operating picture. And for airports where full APOC is not yet feasible, which is understandable, a minimum viable version, integrated comms, clear duty roles, a shared picture, even if partly manual, is achievable now and delivers real improvement. So you don't have to plan for something big. You can start even from today and plan and do small steps towards this bigger picture. And the second core capability, I would say, is decision making under pressure. And good crisis decision making is not a talent, it is a trained practice capability, and it degrades without exercise. So again, ICAO stresses the need for predefined decision structures, especially in the first hours when information is incomplete and the time is short. The single most effective measure across every disruption type is early activation. Mobilizing crisis arrangements before a situation is clearly a crisis. And I have seen there is some resistance in this from several crisis managers. I understand that it feels like overreaction, but the cost is little because it's only staff time. On the other hand, late activation consistently produces worse outcomes. So then empowerment, and this is often politically sensitive, I understand, with top management, duty managers and operations directors must have the authority to make major decisions like service restrictions or evacuations and etc. without waiting for board approval. If that authority doesn't exist before the crisis, it won't appear fast enough during the crisis. So unified command beats parallel command structures every time. We've seen it in every post-crisis analysis. So set clear escalation and de-escalation criteria. The switch back to recovery mode is often badly controlled, which is also a big issue because it can also create a fresh disruption. And the only way to build all of this is regular exercises, whether we are talking about tabletop or functional or full-scale exercises, exercise as often as possible. Then our next capability is stakeholder coordination. And here, let's be honest, it's a hard truth. An airport's resilience is limited by the weakest link in its partner network because you cannot rely only in your own internal capability. You depend critically on airlines, on the ground handlers, the air traffic control, the government agencies, and none of them can be assumed to perform under pressure without pre-built coordination. So disruptions most often originate at the interfaces when we have the handoffs between organizations where responsibilities overlap and the communication breaks down. Therefore, the model I previously referred to, the APOC model, the Airport Operations Center model, gives you a structural framework for real-time interagency coordination. The practical work is supply chain mapping, identifying and mitigating the single points of failure in your partner network, and coordinated protocols agreed before a crisis, not during the crisis. When you try to figure out your responsibilities and who has responsibility over what during the crisis, you will not manage to handle properly. And then joint exercises are not optional. I referred to exercises previously, and I will repeat it again. Joint exercises with your stakeholders are not optional. And in fact, IKEA mandates the agency exercises. So for most airports, meeting that standard is realistic and it's also meaningful to do. And then another core resilience capability, it's crisis communications. So communication failure is the single most consistent contributor to poor outcomes across every disruption type, no matter if we are talking about a pandemic, if we are talking about infrastructure, security, or operational, doesn't matter. You will see that communication failures, they create bad outcomes. And communication, well, is not a soft skill. It is a critical, of course it is, but should also be a critical operational function. The principle here is simple. Disruption is far more tolerated when passengers, for example, are informed. Imagine, I'm sure you've been in situations like this. Unclear or delayed information creates panic, creates overcrowding, and lasting reputation damage, and angry passengers, and confused staff. And talking about confused staff, internal communication also matters just as much, because when internal comms collapses, operational productivity drops immediately, and it is often overlooked. So the answer here is prepared playbooks, have already or templates ready, have designated spokespersons that they are trained, have multilingual versions, all drilled in advance and all tested, and make sure you have everything there. And also, we are talking about nowadays social media are very important. So even social media monitoring and response is now essential, because major disruptions, passenger information flows primarily through digital channels. And we have seen, even from the Gulf crisis, the recent crisis, gave us a live comparison. We had proactive time-stamped messaging versus reactive inconsistent messaging. And these two different approaches, they had very different outcomes for the passengers. So for African airports, to make it more relevant to the region, for African airports, the diversity of nationalities and languages makes multilingual communication a specific practical requirement. So for you, it's not an optional, it's not an extra, it's not a good have, but it should be a practical requirement. And then passenger welfare. Um, Passenger welfare during disruption is both a legal but is also an ethical duty, and it carries real exposure when it is mishandled. The essentials are straightforward, okay, but let's be clear. Let's mention them. We are talking about adequate food. We're talking about water, seating, rest areas, and accommodation. But we also have some groups that they need more. We have transit passengers, for example, that they are especially vulnerable because they have no local contacts. They might have no local currency. They might have language barriers. So their reliance on the airport is way bigger. And then we have other vulnerable passengers, like elderly passengers or disabled or unaccompanied minors, that we need specific protocols and dedicated trained staff, and this cannot be improvised. So the key to doing this well is pre-agreement. We need automatic activation protocols with the airlines, with the ground handlers, agreed before the event. And for large scale or extended disruptions, pre-positioned supplies and trained teams are what allow an immediate response rather than a scramble. And again, the Gulf crisis made the scale real. These 8,000 passengers stranded in Doha at once, that was a big cost. And the cost of planning for welfare is modest, but the cost of failing, either we're talking about from a legal perspective, regulatory, or reputational, is far higher. So those are the capabilities that make the difference. And Romas, to link back to your question, I would say that the two most underestimated are coordination and communication. And airports invest in their systems and assume that their partners they will follow, but you don't if they will, and they might even not. So you have to coordinate and you have to communicate. Hope does it makes sense.
It really makes sense, Seraphim, and my the participants here will agree that the two elements that constantly and consistently fail during emergency drills that we conduct at our airports. One being coordination, the second being communication, and we've seen that time and time again. So, Seraphim, let's now move from lessons learned to practical action. So, according to you, what are the key measures airports should prioritize today to strengthen resilience before a disruption occurs, particularly in relation to, as you mentioned before, infrastructure, business continuity planning, and preparedness?
Sure. So first of all, I would say infrastructure and climate adaptation. So every infrastructure decision is a resilience decision. So resilience has to be designed in from the initial planning stages, not retrofitted after a failure, because this way is always way more expensive. um, Modular constructions helps designs that let you adapt and isolate components during a disruption without taking down the whole operation. And then we also need climate adaptation to be asset specific. For example, tailored risk assessments for runway surfaces, drainage, power infrastructure, and terminal systems, because each has a different exposure. Redundancy only counts if it is generally independent. So if we have separate circuits, separate fuel, regularly load tested, shared infrastructure gives false confidence. And critically, you have to make the financial case. And I know this is a very sensitive topic for management, and especially in the relationship between management and C-level executives. But indeed, it's critical. You have to make the financial case. You have to quantify the return of investment, the ROI, because resilience competes for capital against revenue projects. I understand, and unfortunately loses unless the downside is quantified. So a single avoided major irregular operations event often exceeds the annual cost of the system that prevented it. So that's something that we need to talk to our C-level executives. And for African airports, calibrate this to your local risk, because you might have issues with coastal flooding, you might have heat stress, you might have grid instability, you might have water reliability. Each needs its own assessment and its own way of reaction. Then business continuity. Business continuity is complementary to emergency response, but it is distinct, and that distinction matters. We have our airport emergency plan. The AEP handles the immediate crisis, and we need the business continuity plans the plan that ensures the sustained operations of critical functions during and after a disruption. And they are different documents serving different time frames, and conflating them leave gaps. So the foundation is identifying and prioritizing your critical functions, the services that you should keep up and running. Then you establish and you validate your recovery time objectives and your recovery point objectives for each one of these for critical operations. Um, then you cross-reference your business continuity plan with your stakeholders, like your airlines, your handlers, and your government plans to find the gaps at the interfaces. And then what is also important, you review, you exercise annually, and especially after any disruptive event. Even after a minor disruptive event that you activate your business continuity plan, you go back, you review, and you revise accordingly. And for many African airports, as far as I know, a formalized business continuity plan does not yet exist. And I want to be clear, this is not a criticism. It is an honest observation. And it is also the single most impactful near-term investment that many airports could make here. So the starting point is simple. Identify your 10 most critical functions, set a recovery objective for it, and validate them in a realistic exercise. And then let's move on to the resilience maturity. The resilience framework that we referred previously is not a benchmark to hit immediately. It is rather a map to navigate deliberately. So let's split it in 4 levels. We have in level 1 the foundational level. So here we have basic emergency roles, we have contexts, we have a current airport emergency plan, and an essential communication tree, and basic backup awareness. Then if we move on to level 2, it's the more structured level. We are defining critical function, a basic business continuity plan, which should be aligned with the airport emergency plan, regular internal exercises, and partner contact protocols. Then we move on to level 3, which is the integrated level. Here we have multi-agency coordination, we have tested backups, we have manual workarounds, we have passenger welfare protocols, and we have joint exercises with our stakeholders. And we are going to the level 4, which is the advanced level. And here we have integrated operational visibility, we have real-time situational awareness, we have a formal lessons learned process, and resilience built into investment decisions. But the message for everyone here is this: the goal is not to reach level 4 by next year. The goal is to honestly locate where you are today. You might be in level 1, you might be in level 2, doesn't matter. It's a start. Just be honest, identify where you are today, and take one deliberate step forward. Progress matters more than perfection. And please keep in mind, preparedness is not a document. It is a continuous working practice of planning, of training, of exercising, relationship building sustained between disruptions. I would adopt a tiered exercise program. Tabletop exercises for command decisions, functional exercises to test systems and departments, and then multi-agency exercises on a defined basis. And as we mentioned already, ICAO sets the standard, the frequency for major multi-agency exercises and annual internal exercises, and this should be realistic targets for all the airports. The risk register also should be a living document. You should review your document quarterly. You should update after every major event. and you should maintain clear ownership and mitigation for its risk. Also, horizon scanning, which it's also important. The systematic observation of geopolitical, climatic, regulatory, and technological change. And this is how you stay ahead of the environment rather than reacting to it. And also mutual aid agreements with your neighboring airports, with the airlines, with your service providers. This will give you, if you have pre-negotiated resource sharing, this will be a great support when a major disruption hits. And then I'm sure that Romas mentioned this before a while when he said about the lessons from the exercises. An exercise that runs smoothly because everybody knows the scenario builds false confidence. So a good exercise creates surprise and exposes gaps. And that is exactly what is it for. So Romas, that's what airports should put in place before disruption strikes.
Thank you, Seraphim, and thank you for highlighting the airport resilience maturity. And I think that many of our participants will go back and ponder on this important element. So, as I said before, and as we follow up, when a disruption does occur, so according to you, Seraphim, what separates airports that recover quickly from those that struggle? I know that at the very start I asked you that question, but I'm repeating that again. And also, what role do recovery planning, lessons learned, and continuous improvement play in closing the resilience loop?
Okay, so when a disruption hits, the quality of the response is largely determined by what you invested beforehand, as we previously mentioned. And I said it before, and I will repeat. Early activation is the most consistently and effective measure there is. Activate before the situation is clearly a crisis, because the cost of activating unnecessarily is way lower than the cost of activating late. Also, operational workarounds. Have pre-practiced manual procedures and alternatives. You need to have them ready. Don't invent them on the day. And then resource management depends on pre-approved authorities and supplier contracts. So you cannot really surge without waiting for sign-off. And in terms of command, I also mentioned previously, unified command prevents the parallel competing responses that emerge when airport, when airlines, when emergency services and government each run their own playbook. So again, we draw back to this communication and coordination we mentioned previously, and communicate at regular intervals, regardless of whether there is a new information. Silence is read as disorder. So better communicate more, even if you have no new message to share, than no communicate at all. This silence is a problem. And also log everything in real time. Logging is essential. It's essential for the post-event review, it's essential for regulatory reporting, and also for legal protection. And it cannot be reconstructed afterwards. So it's important to have real-time logging. And then recovery is where resilience either grows or stagnates. And it is the phase that gets the least structure attention, because the moment the immediate crisis passes, the pressure to just return to normal ops is overwhelming. So start with operational restoration sequences. Have a pre-planned order for bringing functions back, decided in advance, and do not improvise under pressure. Also important to manage the backlog. So you have missed connections, you have stranded travelers, you have accumulated baggage, with processes and pattern coordination ready to go. So conduct a hot wash immediately after the event, capture the raw insights before they are lost or revised, and follow it with a normal post-event review, and maintain a lessons learned register that documents, tracks, and assigns ownership for every lesson. A register no one monitoring, and I have seen it a lot in many different organizations that they maintain this register, they maintain these lessons learned and stuff. But a register that no one monitors is just a filing exercise. And again, the Gulf crisis makes the vivid right now. Um, Unwinding 2 weeks of near shutdown of Dubai and Doha took weeks of rebooking and repositioning and everything. And managing backlog at that scale is itself a resilience capability. So the loop only closes when lessons captured become investments made. And that's how I think that loop should close.
Thank you, Seraphim. Ladies and gentlemen, this topic is so rich that time's flying. So as we reach towards the end of this webinar, and please bear with us a few more minutes, we'll just overspill the 1 hour mark. So Seraphim, if you were to distill everything we have discussed into practical guidance for airport leaders, what are the most important actions airports should take before, during, and after a disruption to strengthen resilience?
Okay, let's bring this together into a practical checklist across the 3 phases. Before the disruption, maintain a live risk register, align your airport emergency plan and your business continuity plan, run regular exercises, test your backups and manual fallbacks, and agree partner roles and mutual aid. Then, during the disruption, activate your crisis arrangements early, establish unified command, activate passenger welfare protocols, communicate at regular intervals, and use your operational workarounds. And after the disruption, sequence operational recovery, conduct the hot wash, update the lessons register, and update your plans and procedures. And most importantly, convert lessons into investment decisions before the next budget cycle, to talk a little bit about money as well. So the single thread through all of it, the quality of the before column determines the quality of the during column. And the airports that do the before work manage the during far better. But none of this is sustainable without strategic commitment from the top. And here is where we need our leadership. Leadership commitment is not a platitude. Board and senior engagement is what drives resilience, and capability visible degrades when that engagement lapses between crises. So we need sustained investment because this sustained investment matters, because resilience budgets are, and I know that very well, resilience budgets are the first to be cut when finances tighten. They don't generate revenue, and their benefits are invisible when they're working. So stakeholder collaboration at senior level, relationship with airlines, handlers, regulators, and emergency services is one of the most valuable assets you have when a crisis hits, and it is built between crises, not during the crisis. This is too late. And long-term foresight means incorporating a wide range of futures, climate, technology, geopolitical, any other, into strategy and into your infrastructure decisions. And proactive regulation means helping shape sector-wide resilience standards rather than waiting for minimum compliance to be imposed. For African airports, again, operating under tight budgets, the financial case for sustained investment has to be made in hard terms, has to be quantified risk and cost of the disruption avoided, and this is how measurable you can convey the message to the leadership and support leadership in making the decision. So let me distill everything into 6 practical themes. So we have governance, number one. We need to clarify decisions and authority before a crisis, which means we need our duty managers to be empowered and to be able to act without board approvals in case of during a crisis, and set escalation and de-escalation triggers, and also exercise decision making. Second, in terms of infrastructure and utilities, eliminate single points of failure, test backups under realistic loads, and extend the resilience perimeter beyond the airfield to parking, to drainage, and to your utilities and other. Then in terms of digital resilience, treat your technology supply chain risk as seriously as internal IT risk, maintain and practice manual fallbacks, and implement network segmentation and tested incident response. Then for people and partners, map critical dependencies annually, negotiate resilience standards into contracts, and build cross-training and mutual aid before you need them. In communication and passenger welfare, pre-build communication playbooks with templates, have your spokespersons trained and assigned, and have your multilingual versions, that automatic welfare protocols with your stakeholders, the airlines, the ground handler providers and staff, and pre-position supplies for transit passengers. And then for recovery and learning, sequence restoration in advance, run format post-event reviews, maintain a monitored lessons register, and treat every disruption as an investment decision point. These 6 are not separate work streams. Weakness in one of them undermines all the others. So you need to approach this holistically. And let me close with the threads that run through everything and bring them home to African airports. First, focus on capability. Effectiveness under pressure matters more than documentation. Just have a document on the shelf, it doesn't mean anything. You need to be able to effectively react under pressure. A tested capability beats a perfect plan, and that is achievable at regional airports just as much as at major hubs. It simply looks different at its scale. Second, adapt the 4-phase approach. Shift investment beyond response into anticipation, absorption, and recovery. And that imbalance, it's not unique to Africa, but its consequences are sharpened here, where buffers are thinner, as we understand. Then, third, understand the interconnected landscape. Prepare for all 7 disruption categories we mentioned and for their compound interactions. Fourth, manage your dependencies. Your resilience is limited by your weakest partner link. And in many African airports, the partner interfaces are where the biggest gap sits. And fifth, prioritize learning and action. The airports that actively implement lessons from recent events, like the Gulf crisis or any other example we can draw, will be the ones that achieve real resilience. And the overall message is build resilience that matches your context. Large hubs, mid-size or regional airports need different solutions, but all of them need clear governance, tested fallbacks, reliable partners, and practical recovery arrangements. So I think that brings it all together into something practical. And now, Romas, I think we are at the closing part. Romas, you're muted.
Thank you, Seraphim, for bringing all that into one single slide, summarizing all the key points, the key elements. I just want to inform all the audience present today that the slides will be shared with you. As we reach the Q&A session now, we have a couple of questions from the audience, which I will take because you've been so fantastic as an audience, as I've said. So the first question is from Ahmed Okasha. So how should communication strategies differ between a security incident and an operational disruption, such as a power outage or severe weather? So basically, what is the difference in the strategy in communications when it relates to a security incident? Seraphim?
The main thanks, Romas. The main difference is who needs. Well, in your tree of communication, the main difference is who needs to be informed first. If we are talking about security events, most probably you have different departments and different executives that they need to get this information first in order to start reacting. If we are talking about safety event, again, you have different sequence. If we are talking about an infrastructure event, again, we might have a different sequence. So the communication protocol should be the same. The way that you have organized how you communicate should be uniform, should be one. What is different is who you prioritize based on a certain event.
Okay. Thank you, Seraphim. Hope this answers the questions of Mr. Okasha. There's another question from Prakash Mahabir Singh, and probably you've answered that during the presentation, but you might as well highlight it again. What are the most effective measures airports have implemented to improve resilience and recover quickly from major disruptions?
I will go back to a couple of stuff that I have seen a lot repeatedly across many different airports, across many different regions. We are all talking about resilience, especially the recent years, is a big discussion about resilience and crisis management and stuff. And we have even coming from leadership that we need to make our organizations more resilient and stuff. But there is quite often this obstacle that I mentioned previously when it comes to finance, when it comes to money. And this is because resilience, it's not something that you can showcase. And I understand it's very difficult for crisis managers and resilience managers to go to their leadership and explain them that this money you will invest to make your organization resilient, it's well spent money. It's not a useless investment, and you will get something out of it, because if you are not prepared and something happens, the cost is going to be way bigger. So that's one thing. Talking about the money part, and even personally, I have been through these discussions, and I had a resistance from my leadership, and I had to make them understand why this is important and why they should give this money. And also, it was also mentioned during the slides. Resilience and business continuity and emergency response plan and everything is not the document itself. Having the document, even having a perfect document, unless you have tested it, unless you have practiced it, and unless you have done realistic exercises and you know that it works and you can expect proper results, just having a document on itself on its own, it doesn't mean anything. I think we need to shift from talking about resilience and making perfect plans and manuals to more practical perspectives of the topic.
Thank you, Seraphim. There are two more questions, but I think that you've responded partly to them. But nevertheless, I will tell you what those questions are. The first one, again from Prakash: how can airports balance operational efficiency with the need to invest in resilience, contingency resources, and emergency preparedness. Again, the question of investment. And another question from Logan Aden. Considering the increased vulnerability of airport industry due to recent global disruptions such as COVID-19, geopolitical conflicts, climate risk, and so on, please share with us how the airport operators can justify investment, again, a question on investment, in passenger welfare and climate resilience, despite limited short-term returns on investment. Seraphim, I think you've answered partly, but if you'd like to add something on that.
Yeah, I think it's worth to mention something. I understand that return on investment is a hot topic, and how to convey this to leadership. And I even understand the leadership reservations. I think the best thing that you can do is try to embed resilience in the design. And actually, I want to use, because that's a unique opportunity. African airports are building and modernizing now, which means resilience can be designed in from the start rather than trying retrofitted after a costly failure. And I think that this is an advantage against more mature markets that no longer have this advantage. So if we talk about in my region in Europe, for example, the airports here are legacy airports. They don't have it's not easy because anything you need to adapt in terms of resilience and stuff, it needs to be retrofitted in what you already have. But in Africa, you're a rising region, which is very important and very interesting, and you can design this from the beginning, and you can embed this from the beginning, which is very unique opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you, Seraphim, and thank you, audience, for those great questions. Seraphim, I have a question. I can't let you go without asking you this. If you were to have one message that you would like every airport leader, CEOs, managing directors, director generals of airports, board, even those I know that work with us today, that are with us today for this webinar, what you would like them to remember about resilience, what would that be?
Yeah, thanks, Romas. If you take one thing from today, let it be this. Resilience is a capability, it's not a document. Plans matter, of course, but they do not perform under pressure. What performs under pressure is trained people, tested systems, and relationships built before a crisis. And this determines how your airport actually performs on the day. And the severity of any disruption is largely predetermined by the decisions you make long before it happens, as we already said. So the work of resilience is not done during the crisis. It is done now. So you can start even from today.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much, Seraphim, for sharing your expertise and valuable insight with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, apology again for spilling that 1 hour mark, but I think it wouldn't have done justice if I would have curtailed that webinar, because it was so rich in terms of sharing and learning. So today's discussion has clearly demonstrated that resilience is not simply about responding to crisis. It's about building the capabilities, the partnerships, and preparedness that enable airports to anticipate, absorb, recover from, and adapt to disruption. On behalf of ACI Africa, I would like to thank all participants today for joining us and for your active engagement throughout the webinar. We've received some great comments in the chat. We hope that the lessons and practical recommendations shared today will support your airports in strengthening resilience and preparing for the challenges ahead. Thank you once again, Seraphim. Thank you, Munich Airport International, for being a great partner of ACI Africa. And thank you all for your participation. We wish you a great end of day and wonderful weekend. Until the next ACI Africa webinar, I wish you well. Bye, everyone.